Howdy, all you delicious people. I want to see something before this review gets started. So in this review, I obviously had a problem with grading this film. Like I was desperately saying the words like default, like thing. Like, is there some kind of middle of the road or some kind of something that I could just say that this movie is to just call it a video, or to call it a grading system? Uh, Most of this movie I cannot actually say is to have been in a positive light. We'll say that. There's nothing that I could go through here and say that this is a positive, in the positive realm of a movie, to just say, oh, like, I think I ended up just saying, like, okay, because I thought okay was just a default kind of thing. But, like, that doesn't even quite, like, I think people would just say okay and just be like, wait a minute, so you're okay with torture scenes and whatever, and like whoever people were doing, like, no, I'm not okay with that at all. That's not what okay meant. If anything, I honestly would probably just downgrade my grading to this just being a bad film simply because it has bad content in parts of it, and there really is a story that I just don't think that there is to be a good payout of this, uh, or a good enough story, or a good enough whatever. It just seems like this movie was to just be built up to try to be some Oscar or Golden Globe, whatever nominated thing, and that's all that this movie was to be set up to be, is to hope that they could get some Oscar nominations or something like that for this film to try and sell it. So, with that said, back to your regularly scheduled review of me oblivious of what I've just said here. And because I've already shot in this review, I had a big problem trying to figure out what the heck to just kind of go and really say how I felt about this film besides just talking about what it was. So, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Card Counter. So, I went into this movie not knowing much of anything about it. Like, to me, I kept thinking in my head, oh, this is just another, like, 21 Kevin Spacey kind of movie where all of a sudden, eventually, this guy is to seemingly come from nothing and then all of a sudden, like, work his way up to be this la-di-da rich guy because he's just smarter than everyone else. That's what I just naturally assumed that this movie would just be about, like another card movie. And I was like, okay, let's get into this. Let's see what this is. And then all of a sudden, they have this very dark, disturbing story within this movie where I'm just like, why is this here? Why is this here in this movie? Like, did they just want to get some consideration for an Oscar or something, or like were they gearing this movie up for awards this season, or like what was going on here? So here is what this movie is to seemingly play out to be. Like, at first you're thinking, oh, it's a card movie that seems interesting. All of a sudden we end up finding out that this guy had gone to prison for a decade and then had came out to eventually decide that he had learned to count cards from prison and decided, well, how about I go on and like go into casinos and start working on my talent, working on my craft, and make a decent living off of this, but not something where he's going to be retiring off of anytime soon. Just consistently going into the casinos, making a decent payout, but not like millions upon millions of dollars kind of payout. So we end up having this guy who is William Tell, who is to tell us a lot more than this guy had just went to prison. It also seems that this guy was to eventually be a part of the craziest prison you could possibly imagine. That eventually this prison had dealt with interrogations, torturing, all of the above, and then some and more, to where I guess these people probably wrote the book on torturing people, I guess. And so once we eventually find this story and see it played out, eventually we realize that really the whole build of William eventually getting to this higher and higher poker stakes game and whichever, eventually we could say that maybe not everything is to just be held within two cards or a number of cards. And there is to just be something that has to get done. And that's all I can cryptically say for this movie. I would say that this, like, I have a hard time really giving this movie a grading system. I think if there's like a default setting, it's probably gotta be like okay of a film. Because I don't know if I could really go ahead and say that, like, this is anything but a default setting of a movie. Would I recommend people to watch this film? Probably not. But, like, I don't think that the movie is bad, but I just don't think that there's also anything good about it either. Like, I just feel that it's such a slow paced movie that has at some point some weird goofy camera angles that I'm trying to figure out why do they have these weird and or goofy camera angles in parts of this film, which I'm trying to figure out. Were they trying to shoot this for like the 3D thing, or like what were they shooting this for? I was so confused. Because eventually when they shoot inside this prison, there's these like this weird wonky camera that is to follow them around, and I was trying to figure out what that was all about. Was that for like an IMAX? Did they shoot this for like IMAX? Like, what was the goofy camera angle for? I'm so confused and I'm trying to figure that out. So, but anyways, so there's a much darker story here. Like I said, like a prison torture story out of a card game movie. Seems so odd to combine these two. I don't care if there's some kind of like history or like tying into these things, or maybe this is based on true story thing still, or whatever. I don't know what this is, but like it just like seems too weird, like to have just think, oh, this is another like a card movie, oh, that'll be interesting. Like, I've ended up seeing The Gambler with Mark Wahlberg, and I kind of assumed that like this movie would be just like that. But then we end up going to this drastically dark story, and I don't even know why they had to have the bedroom scene between William Tell's character and Lalinda, who is both Oscar Isaac, who is the main character guy, and Tiffany Haddish. I was like, why do we even have to have them like going at it in this bedroom? Because like really, like not everybody is to not have clothes. But it was just kind of like, okay, eventually I guess this is to build up this relationship and say that these people really liked one another. But it also seems like Linda was kind of getting the short end of the stick, that she didn't get to really know anything about this guy because he was so mysterious. But like, and that's why I don't really understand the very end of this. But it is what it is. So with that said, I think that's all that I wanted to talk about this movie very cryptically. So default setting grading, I don't know what to grade this. Like, I think it's so like the dialogue is just so like, okay, this is so weird. This is like, and not to mention just kind of Kirk just kind of popping in. who is Ty Sheridan's character, who is all of a sudden popping in to just kind of be in this movie from bits and pieces. And I'm like, why is this guy even here? Like, why is this guy really in this movie besides to set up this side mission, let's just say, but like I can't understand why this kid is here. Like to eventually give William Tell a driving force to eventually do what he's doing. But I'll talk about the rest of this when we get into spoilers. So it's about that time. Let's go out of our way to say that it's that customary time yet again to go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time getting to spoil this movie. So, if anything, I'm probably going to get to the meat and potatoes of this thing. I'm going to try to get this done as quickly as possible. So I'm not going to go over every single tiny minute detail that this movie tends to do because it needs X amount of minutes to kill. I'm going to do this in kind of the easiest way to approach this film, or just a part of which that I can just kind of call it a day at some point. So let's go into this. Let's go into spoilers. So, setting up this guy, William Tell, is to have gone to prison supposedly for 8 years. We never really get to know his actual name. He just goes by William Tell. So he went to prison for 8 years. He ended up learning how to card count, and so eventually when he went out of prison, he decided to okay, I'll go ahead and I'll just take this talent. And William goes and takes just enough to get by, just enough to get to the next town, just enough to get to the next casino and try to win more. And but this is this guy where in the very beginning we end up kind of breaking down how is it that he is to count cards. We have this +1 -1 kind of way of doing things, where he is to kind of, when every card is to be put out, he is to eventually kind of count the things in his head and figure out eventually what is to be coming out next. So William Tell, for the first time out, he ends up getting $750, and he ends up leaving with that, and he's fine with that. And so eventually he goes on and continues to go to these casinos, and it seems like people are getting the word out that this guy is to consistently be doing this. He's a mover and shaker, and is to consistently keep moving to certain casinos and shifting and whatever. So eventually it seems that there is to be this guy named Slippery Joe that is to talk to Tell and say, hey man, how about we go to this other casino? There's plenty of tables over there, and there's plenty of big games over there. And so by the time that they make it there, they end up making it to the very last table, and they're like, well, I guess we're not gonna make it here. There's to be this guy who evidently in the credits is called Mr. USA, because I don't know what it is with this guy. He has this this USA hat and this USA tank top, and every time he wins, USA, USA. I'm like, who cares, buddy? But supposedly, I guess this guy, his backstory is supposedly he was in the military, and then he decided to go on and go to casino and win big, as well as him consistently going USA, USA whenever he is to win, or just seemingly whenever. Whatever we see him, we can tell, because USA, I'm like, yeah, whatever. So eventually what ends up happening is that Linda ends up bumping into William Tell. And so Linda is just like, well, you know what? You could probably actually make a pretty good living. It seems like you're the myth of the William Tell has just kind of gone, and people have started to speak, and people have started to say things ooh, this William Tell, he's not to be messed with. So Linda's make an offer that eventually this guy could get a backer if he really wanted to. and could make a real killing. And William Tell is like, well, yeah, but like I don't want to be like I don't want to be in like a celebrity kind of poker celebrity circuit, because what he's doing is to do it on the low low, and William doesn't eventually want to get caught, and that's his big thing. And Linda is starting to quickly figure that out, because Linda's like, William, have you ever done time? And he's like, and she's like, I think you have. Like, I think that's the reason why you're holding back, and like eventually you just want to get by. Like, there's something about you that kind of just tells me that. So Linda is just like, well, okay, like, hey, like if you want, like, you can get somebody to like kind of like sponsor you, or eventually kind of just fund you and like be a high roller or whatever. But hey, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that. So all of a sudden, Linda is to go off, and bizarrely, like, William is just to like stick this into his head about like, well, maybe there's something there with that, but like he can't figure out like what that is. Like, I don't know, maybe like William's looking at Linda and just be like, like like I'm kind of just curious about why she's drinking that drink the way she is. Like, I don't know, like maybe it's a normal way of somebody drinking the drink, but like it was kind of like 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 the way she was like drinking. I don't know. It was like it was getting to me. But anyway, so what ends up happening is, so William Tell eventually goes to this this uh God, what is the perfect word? Uh this kind of, what's the perfect word? Uh William Defoe's character, who is Gordo, is doing this speech or presentation that he's to go on and do this whole speech in front of a number of seated people about ID scanning of a person's face, and how eventually these casinos will eventually go and do that kind of thing. And he's going on and on and on about it. Like, he ends up giving himself the title of Major Gordo. And so we have William Tell, who ends up going to this presentation that Gordo is doing because it's a familiar name to him. And so William Tell sits in there and is to watch this thing, but then eventually decides to walk off. Before he ends up doing that, Kurt is to all of a sudden get up also and to give this guy his phone number and to say like, hey man, like, call me, like I want to talk to you about something. So all of a sudden, William Tell is to eventually go and just like and call this person like, hey, like, for whatever reason you gave me this number, so like you got your 15 minutes, like, what do you want? So all of a sudden, Kirk is to eventually talk to William Tell, and he is to say that uh, he knows something about William Tell. There's something about him. There's some kind of connection, because Kirk has done his research on William Tell. And so Kirk is to say, like, hey man, like, my dad had eventually come back from what Gordo had done, and he had been a wild and changed man that eventually he ended up like hurting his wife, and then hurting, of course, Kirk's father. And so eventually the whole thing of this is Kirk ended up finding out because of this man who was Gordo. Uh, like Kirk's life had kind of like not gone as well as he would have hoped, I guess. So Kirk is wanting to go after this Gordo guy and torture and kill him like the people at the prison that this guy had gone and done the same things to these people. Because evidently Gordo was this high-ranking officer at this prison where evidently there was a bunch of people being tortured and stripped naked and humiliated, and every kind of interrogation possible. Gordo was to be a part of it or to eventually be somewhere in here. And so naturally, we're assuming that William Tell was to maybe be a prisoner in this prison. And we're thinking, oh my god, that has got to be awful. And so William Tell is telling Kirk, it's like, well, yeah, like, there are several people that, like, forcibly had to do what we had to do. Like, Kirk's father had to do what he had to do. Like, there was no, like basically we were just like like people were just kind of following what people were saying, and like so like no one could say no to anything. So all of a sudden we end up actually finding out that William Tell in this prison supposedly wasn't a prisoner, he was actually a guard in this prison. And so Gordo and William Tell is like walking through this prison, and so Gordo was like, you know what, William Tell, like, or whoever his name was, Tell, like, you know what, I think I like you. I'm gonna put you on nights. And so all of a sudden we end up just seeing William Tell just torturing and beating people, and so this guy knows every single bit about torture because he has had to forcibly do every single thing imaginable to a human being. And I'm like, wow, what a way to just kind of make us just like we were to invest in this character, and all of a sudden they spin around and we're like, okay, maybe I don't want to invest in this character because of eventually who we find out he is. Man, what a way to just kind of deflate a film. Just like, I don't know if I really want to watch this anymore at this part, because it's like, it's a horrible thing to eventually see a man who we are to invest in all of a sudden be a person that we don't like. Obviously, for obvious reasons. Like, he's kind of the villain at this part in this story, but then all of a sudden what ended up happening is they were a part of this program called SERE, SERE, that there was this program of like basically interrogation and doing anything under the sun. And so they went to this specific prison to do all that. And they mentioned like the many hefty amount of things that these people were all to do to just mentally and physically just like break these people. And they mentioned all these things that they were going to do these people. Like at one point, like people are stripped without clothes and they're just like walking around to just humiliate these people. And like pictures are being taken, all kinds. I'm like, God, what is this freaking movie? Good God. So, but we push on, and so eventually what ends up happening is supposedly these people, some of the kind of smaller fish, ended up going to prison for quite a long time. But some of the bigger fish, I think, ended up completely getting away scot-free from all of this. Just because, like, they were the higher commanding officers, and they probably just got freaking, they probably just got like discharged, released, or whatever. like nothing really bad happened to them. I don't believe, because that's what it seems like that is to be of what's going on in the film. That eventually maybe these people just got freaking down like maybe down a part of their uh, what's the word? Uh, they lost rank. They lost from one rank to be down a rank. Maybe that's all that really happened to them. I don't really know. Uh, I don't think they really talked about that in the story. But anyways, so like Gordo ends up just calling himself Major. So it's like, was he just busted down to Major? And then they also just said like, okay, bust down in rank, and then we'll just discharge you. Uh, Maybe that's what they did, like a dishonorable discharge or something like that. I don't know. So pushing on. So Tell had to spend 8 years because of that whole thing, and so that's the reason why after he got out, he decided to go and count cards so that eventually he could just kind of, for the rest of his life, just kind of get by. So Kirk is telling Tell that it's like, hey, I want to go and kill this guy, and obviously you want to be in on this too. I know you do. And William Tell is like, you know what, like, how about like you not do that, you not do this thing, and how about you like just come with me, and we'll just go to casino, and you can just bet on sports games, and you can just kind of hang out at like sports bars or whatever. You can just kind of hang out with people, make bets, win, lose money, whatever. Like just hang out with me. Like I need someone here with me. Like hang out with me. So Kirk is like, okay, I'll do this. Like, sure, why not? So, Kirk with the C. We have to keep cementing that. So, eventually, Tell is to eventually have a driving force to want to eventually keep doing these casino tables and keep winning big. And eventually, he ends up getting into this, like, celebrity tour of things because he's doing so well. And so Linda is to really just start to like try to poke around. Like Linda is starting to ask Kirk about Tell, just like, hey, is there something that I don't know about this guy? Like, is there something that I need to just like? Why isn't this guy wanting to do like every single bit to win every like because we have this part where Tell is to get sponsored by this one company, and Tell is like, well, what do I really have to do? And Linda's like, well, you all you have to do is just wear their T-shirt. And Tell is like, we also have Tell who goes to apartment buildings, and puts bed sheets all over every single stitch of furniture, and there seems to be several paintings and stuff like that that he ends up adjusting to put in I guess the bathroom or something like that. And so when eventually we have Kirk towards the end of this movie eventually seeing this room, he's like, you seriously like you seriously live like this? And like we have him like putting sheets over every bit of furniture, and he like ties down his beds and stuff like that to just kind of like I'm just assuming like he's gonna murder somebody in this room. That's what I think is happening. Like I think he like doesn't want to leave a fingerprint in any part of this room, or he's going to murder somebody, or he doesn't want to leave any kind of DNA in this room for whatever reason. That's what I'm thinking is happening, but I'm not 100% sure. But we also had this one spot where Tell was in prison, and he ended up going and grabbing some part of this guy's food just so that way he could get freaking beaten up. And so Tell kept getting up and getting beaten up by this guy, and like he just wanted to fight somebody, or he just wanted someone to kill him or something because of what had happened, to just kind of wear on him. And so, like, we had that odd moment where I had to kind of like put that in there in the review. So we go on, and so Tell keeps going through this circuit, and eventually we start to have Linda, who is telling both of these guys, it's like, why don't you guys actually do like anything besides what you're doing? Like, why can't you read a book? Like, we have like Linda asking Kirk, like, do you read a book? And he's like, yeah, like poker for dummies. And so Linda is like, well, hey, uh like, have you ever done anything else? Like, maybe I should get you another book for dummies so you could read. And so then eventually also, like, Linda is asking Tell, it's like, why aren't you ever doing, like, anything? Because all he does is likes to just play cards, and that's all he likes to do. So also we have Tell, who doesn't want to have a hotel that's near the casino. Or at the casino. He just wants to just go and get a own certain kind of hotel. And Linda's like, well, why don't you just live, like, considering you're just going to place to place anyways, why not just like have a room at the hotel? What's the big deal? And he's like, I I just want to have my own little separate thing. Like, I think that maybe if Tell had an actual room at the hotel, he would just get more tempted to just gamble more. So, like, I guess maybe Tell just doesn't want to be tempted, I guess. So, what ends up happening is, so eventually Linda is like, well, hey, like, William, how about you and we'll just go out and, like, have you ever seen the world lit up? And William tells like, well, yeah, I've seen the world on fire. And Linda's like, that's not what I mean. So they end up going to this big, massive park that I guess is all lit up during, I guess this would be Christmas time, I'm assuming, or assessing. So, because why would there be so many lights? There would only have to be lights during Christmas time. So, unless that's just the way they do things, and they just have this thing lit up like year round for whatever reason. Maybe it's cool during the wintertime. So both of them end up going through this lit up area. And so eventually William tells Linda, it's like, well, you know what? Like, I'm actually kind of happy that you brought me here. And then all of a sudden, eventually, like, their hands get closer and closer and closer. And I'm like, like a nice moment. And then all of a sudden, Linda and William both hold hands. And I'm like, that's nice. That's nice. So we have William at one point telling Kirk that that if Kirk is to ever go and talk to his mother again, William will go and sleep with another woman again. Because Kirk ends up asking William, like, when was the last time you ever slept with a woman? Like, you could probably easily pay for one. You do realize that, right? Like, freaking if money is flowing, you know. So, but yeah, so they make this bet with one another, and so what ends up happening is eventually at some point we have both William and we have Linda, and they're going at it in the bedroom. And so now Kirk has to hold his end of this bargain. And so now we are at the big enchilada, the big World Series of Poker contest thing. And so William is to now tell basically Kirk it's his turn. Because William Tell takes Kirk to his apartment and to show him what his apartment looks like. And Kirk is like, why does your room look like this? This is so weird. And so eventually Tell is to tell Kirk like that he had done this whole thing, the whole World Series of Poker, all of this whole celebrity tournament. He did this whole entire thing just for Kirk to eventually get this guy's life back together. And we have consistent times where William is telling Linda this also, where it's like we end up really like he's saying like bits and pieces about it, but we don't realize that this is this guy's complete driving force to do this whole thing. He didn't care about him, he only cared about Kirk. And so William is telling Kirk, like, you need to now drop everything that you're doing and go and talk to your mother. You need to go and talk to her. You need to speak with her. And eventually, when you go and do that, she will call me and I will confirm that all of this has happened. Because Kirk was to eventually go with William Tell to this prison, and Kirk didn't want to go. He didn't even want to look at the building because something had just bothered him about that building. And like they had a whole like pool session where they end up kind of talking about it. And so like William is trying to scare Kirk into basically being like, okay, like I'm gonna have you set up for the rest of your life, because Kirk is to like sit there and William tells like, hey, like how much money do you need because of your debts? Like you probably have about X amount of dollars in debt from going to school. Here's all that money for that. Like I had figured that out too. And wait a minute, like I'm sure your mother has plenty of debt also, where, well, here's the big fat loads of money for her debt. And like, oh, are you going to go back to school? Here's 80 grand for that. Like, so we end up having seemingly William, like, dumping out like $100,000, like 100 grand, 100 grand, I think, or 150, somewhere around there, like somewhere in the ballpark of that amount of money. And so William is like, I have your entire life right here in this, on this floor, like for you to just retire, and like if you did nothing after this, I wouldn't care. Like, but like if you covered your debt and your mother's debt and then you vanish off the face of the earth, like then I'd be okay with that. But like you are covered or set for the rest of your life. And all you needed to go and do is talk to your mother, and then we'll call it done. Well, like you can do whatever you want with this money afterwards, but like you'll be covered. I did all of this celebrity card tour thing just for you. I didn't want to do this at all, but I did this all for you. So Kirk is now just going like, okay, like I will go and I will talk to my mother. I will do the thing that you said. So because Kirk is to eventually go and want to kill Gordo with supposedly some dart gun. And William tells, like, did you really think this through? Like, have you even practiced with this dart gun thing that you're going to supposedly go and kill this guy with? Like, are you sure that that this is going to go out without a whisper or whatever? So, because it just feels like Kirk didn't really think this through. Like he was just like, this sounds like a sound thing, but like William is like, this guy's probably never killed a man in his life. So anyways, so William Tell is going off to his World Series of Poker tournament and is doing really, really well. And then all of a sudden, before they end up going out, uh, William is to get a text from Kurt, and because William is to tell Linda like, "Hey, Kurt is going out to go and like meet his mom, and this is really great, and like it seems like he's doing what I told him to do, so this is great, this is awesome. He's getting his life on track." So all of a sudden, before William gets this tournament going on, all of a sudden William gets a text from Kirk to say like, "I wish you were here," and it's the exact same photo of Gordo's house that Kirk was to Google Map earlier on. That like Kirk was just so proud about like, "Hey man, I've been going through Google Maps and I ended up finding out Gordo's exact address." And like William is still like, "Yeah, but like, are you really gonna go to? Are you really going through in this? Are you really gonna do this? Like, come on, man! Like, just kind of just kind of like, just give it up. Just kind of go and just like, I'm setting up your life for you." Like, we have at one point where like William Tell, when Kirk was in that room, like he was giving him this scare tactic to eventually start setting up this big case that all had all of some of these torture weird devices in it, and like that was a scare factor that Kirk was trying to do, and William was telling Kirk how he had been able to know numerous things of torture, and like maybe like he can simply torture him with like a sandbag that he can get off of eBay, because Kirk ended up mentioning like something about doing something to Gordo where he was to like string him up and like to humiliate him and whatever, and supposedly this stuff that Kirk was gonna get was supposedly off of eBay, and it's like, okay, what a goofy thing that eventually they turn back around, and William Tell is like, "Oh, maybe I can go and get something off of eBay and be able to." But so weirdly enough, with this movie, so William is to go on and do this whole tournament and is to probably win it all. And then all of a sudden, William is to be like the third person left on this table. He could have won this whole thing. But all of a sudden, William decides, like, "Excuse me, I need a moment." And then William ends up, like, vanishing and, like, goes and is to eventually see this news report that evidently Kirk had gotten killed while going into this home, that Kirk had tried to fire this bizarre dart gun thing, and he missed. And evidently, Gordo had defended himself and had shot Kirk and killed him. And so then William decided to drive all the way to Gordo's home and eventually took Gordo's whole entire house and put sheets over every single bit of furniture that this guy had, just like William did to whatever. So eventually, what ends up happening is William is to tell like Gordo to like kind of sit him down and to just kind of tell him about Kirk and like what they're all planning to do and whatever. And so now William is to tell Gordo like, "Well, like we're gonna go into another room and we're gonna get started." And so eventually we just see them go into this other room. We see nothing that actually goes on. We just see like the camera just kind of sitting here to wait to hear the carnage that is to eventually be played out, and the horrific things that they had probably done to one another. And so all of a sudden, we are to naturally assume that William had killed Gordo horrifically, and then just came out of the room seemingly almost losing two fingers, where he's just kind of holding on to him, but he's like bloody as F. And so he ends up calling 911 on himself to report a homicide. And so the very end of this movie is really just Tell going to prison and having this visitor, and it ends up being Linda. And so we just have the very last thing of this movie is both of them are kind of putting this one finger to this glass, and they're just kind of just there, and that's when the movie just ends. And I'm like, and I know I didn't get to a bulk of the details. Like we end up having uh, the one guy from Minnesota, like the big fat guy that is just to be kind of like another one of the people that they end up having like some kind of story about. But uh, like that's really all this is. Like there's little bits and pieces of story and whatever. But I don't think we really get to know enough really about Linda's character, with the exclusion of like when she used to be at that lights. We had this little story there, um, but yeah. So with that said, like I probably skipped around about a big chunk of this movie, but basically, if people want to check this out after I talked about this whole movie and spoiled it and whatever, and they eventually want to see this movie regardless, because I don't know, or probably someone did see this movie and they're like, yeah, I thought this movie was wild too, or weird, or a bad film, or whichever. Um, and also, I'm sure somebody could tell me the exact details of something that I didn't even bother to go into, because like, for me, I was just like, once we get to a tortured prison scenario thing, I was just like, okay, well, I'm just kind of just like, I didn't want to go into this movie and talk about that. But I saw this movie and then I watched the whole thing, and I was just like, okay, I don't know why I watched this film, but I watched it. Like, and it was a current film that I wanted to like at least check out, and it seemed like there was like a lot of people who ended up seeing this film, wanting to see this film, and whichever. Um, but yeah, like that's what this movie just played out to be, was a movie that was a much more of a film than just some like card counting movie, like a 21. And so a lot of people might have been uh, kind of just kind of just shocked or whatever about this movie. They're just thinking it's some card movie and it becomes this. But yeah, so with that said, I am just gonna get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Uh, yeah. Where could you go ahead and find said? Well, I already, that's too late to do that. Well, either way, I guess to cover my Batukas, like I went and saw this on Fox HD Movies, uh, like so that way I could have said somewhere that I said where you could watch this film, and so at least that's covered. But it's way too freaking late because I should have went into that in the cryptic sense. But I don't know if anybody's gonna watch this after the whole uh the way of which that I talked about this. I'm like, oh, well, I guess I figured out what this movie was now. Anyways, with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.